able to mount a continuous offensive. This is the biggest battle of the Waikato War. And he caught the Marione half assembled at Rangaruri, and he was taken, he held a lightly part, because the fortifications you'll see in the next slide, they were spread over quite a bit. In fact, they've reconstructed it now. If you go down south sometime, stop off at Rangaruri and have a look, because they've just reconstructed it. For the first time, they've started to sort of look at restoring some of these historical sites. And this is what it would look like over here. So that's probably pretty much what it did look like, because it didn't have any grass on it. It was all earth, a huge big earth mound. They did these things quite amazingly, really. So it goes between the Waikato River and Lake Waikari, which is in there. And any land in between the two is probably pretty swampy, you know, right to the side of the river and the side of the lake. Certainly the side of the lake's pretty swampy. And that just gives you an idea of the fights that took place there. It was, in the end, a decisive victory for Cameron and the British, but the total casualties of Maori was significantly lower than that on the government side. So it was a Pyrrhic victory. A victory won at quite a lot of cost to them, you know, because that was going to be tricky. Now King Tawhia originally retreated south from Ngārawahi. Ngārawahi is the Kingitanga base, and it still is. That's where the heartland of Kingitanga is based. But he actually goes up, because I often wondered as a kid, why do they call the King Country the area south of Te Awamutu? Yeah, and the reason is from the Waikato Wars. That's where they kind of escaped and were harboured by Ngāti Maniapoto, and they didn't confiscate much of King Country land because it's pretty marginal land. It's like this. It's getting up towards the central volcanic plateau. It's not good land. Waikato, yes, we'll confiscate that. Taranaki, yes, we'll confiscate that. They have plenty, but we're not going to get much from the King Country. But that's where King Tawhia escaped to, went down into the King Country. That's his whare at Ngārawahi. The next big battle is Patarangi, but this one had a little bit of duplicity in it, because what happened was that they made this huge big part, the biggest one that they'd ever created at Patarangi, and Cameron had a look at it and he thought, this is big, this is too big to attack. I'm going to try and go around the side. And he attacked Rangiawhia, which is this little settlement over the side here. Now Rangiawhia, Maori felt, was set aside because it had a church there, and it had old men, women and children, and they considered it was really neutral and outside the kind of war site, if you like. And but what Cameron did is he bypassed it and he went into Rangiawhia, and of course all the people, all the Maori who'd built themselves up Patarangi raced over to Rangiawhia to defend Rangiawhia, but they thought that he was being very dishonourable and sneaky, because they felt that that was a site that was neutral, because it was harbouring old men, old women and children, you know, and really should not have been touched. And also it was based around a European church. And that's all it's
about 8 or 9 years ago, the group went on a South Waikato
Oh, did you?
tour and actually visited those.
Oh, really?
sites.
Yes, I've been there too. You go from Te Awamutu Museum to, they take you on a trip out there. Yeah, it's great.
So
Yeah.
you can sort of see how, you know, obviously it was a church, obviously,
Yes.
you know, and
Yes.
effective
I think it was headquarters of the main agricultural.
Yes, it was the agricultural heartland of Waikato. That's right. Very significant for them agriculturally, you know. So Maori were pretty disgusted by that, but there's not much they could do, because he was the general and he had won that battle and came through to the last one, which is Orako, which is just about 5 k's away from Te Awamutu. And this is really right at the southernmost border of the Kingitanga area of Waikato, if you like, really. And that's the one where Riwi Maniapoto was asked if he wanted to surrender, And he said, no, we will fight on forever, forever, forever. And that's the Aki 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 comment there. And that's exactly what he did. And it had a little bit of involvement with Von Tensky and the Forest Rangers. But really, they were defeated there. And the consequences, I'm just watching the time here because I'm going to make it, but I'm just pacing myself nicely. Maori in the Waikato suffered extreme land losses, and there, the shaded area on there is giving you an indication of how much land was taken. There's the Waikato River, there's Mercer, because my son lives in Mercer, and I said, you do realise you live on confiscated land, don't you? Because it's funny, because as a kid, I used to go down and visit my uncle at Hiniwai, which is about 5 k's north of Huntly. And when my dad died, he'd expressed a wish to have his ashes buried on the old family farm. But when we were growing up as kids, we never got told anything about the Waikato Wars or anything. I didn't know that it was confiscated land, and even when I buried him, and that was 1974, I didn't know that it was confiscated land. So it just shows you, as you get older, you kind of, your view of history changes, doesn't it, you know? So that's the confiscations. The other thing here was that they confiscated land from those people who were supporters of Queen Victoria, supporters of the Crown as well. And so those people who were actually not rebels, not fighting against those troops, their land got confiscated as well.
So it just is a huge block. The
Just
whole thing was
correct. It was random, yeah, absolutely. But I think, as I've said in my previous presentation to you, and I'll probably say it again too, in order for that land there that's been confiscated to be deemed Crown land, they have to send surveyors in. And they send them surveyors in with theodolites, and they measure out the land into plots. And some of those are going to be farms, and some of those are going to be houses and settlements, and so on at Hamilton, Ngaruawahia, Whatawhana, all Kirikiri, all of these little parongia, all those places will have little sections put in there, and they'll be done with surveys. And once those surveys pegs go into ground, you've got your sovereignty, because you've got a defined legal area, you know, land number, this number, and so on, survey peg, and so on. So this clearly destroyed the economic progress Murray had made in Waikato, and it drove the Kingatanga from there and forced them into Ngāti Maniapoto land, which is now known as the King Country. So that's the origins of the King Country as such. And the interesting thing is, and I always used to say this to my students at school, that the rationale behind the confiscations was called the New Zealand Settlement Act. And I am horrified that they could call it. Why didn't they just be honest and say, let's call it the confiscation of rebels' land or something like that, not the New Zealand Settlement Act, because it's so blatantly saying, well, we're going to reward some of these people by giving them land, and if not, we're going to take land and sell it to people who want it, you know. So I always found that was quite curious, really, that they called it that. It was a mistake by them, I think, but they don't give a tinker's cuss about what they think, you know. Now I'm going to introduce very quickly, there's one guy in particular, Danny Keenan, and he promotes a very strong land argument about the wars. I'm going to scope the other writers on it as well in a minute. But so he's one of the people who you would ask your students to talk about historiography about. So, well, you know, this guy Keenan, he doesn't say it's to do with sovereignty. He says it's to do with land, always to do with land, because he thinks Maori have got a really special relationship with land. And I know that if you have children, you don't anymore, but you know, if you have children, they always ask the parents, what do you want to do with the afterbirth? And Maori will take it back and bury it on their ancestral lands, because the land, now mostly we Europeans wouldn't really worry where that went, they can throw it away. But Maori don't. Maori find it incredibly significant, because that afterbirth is their tie to their whakapapa, and so they take it to their ancestral lands. Now this whole act of that map that I showed you has really put a big kind of question mark over that land, because it's going to be wahitapu sites within that and so on. Now, to be fair, a lot of those wahitapu sites have been preserved, But this guy Danny Kennan, he really milks the thing, because he says the notion of sovereignty is actually tino rangatiratanga. So it's more than chieftainship, it's actually sovereignty. He doesn't see it as detached and legal or political. It's culturally constant, grounded in historic customary landscape. So he sees it's a customary concept. I don't quite see it, but he says it's a Maori way of looking at the significance of the wars because of the land that's lost. And certainly, if you're looking at the rationale, see, I even highlighted grey and grey on Grey's views, you know. So I've come up with, this is my kind of view. I think Kingitanga created their own king and challenged British sovereignty. So I agree with that. I think that's true. It was a challenge for them. Whether that was a true challenge or not, it doesn't matter. It certainly challenged. That's the way it was received by Grey and Gore Brown, his predecessor. When Remi Maniapoto went and helped in the Taranaki War, he was tarred with the Kingitanga brush. And so it didn't matter that he didn't come from there. He was supporting Kingitanga, and therefore he was included as a member of Kingitanga. Grey then spread these rumours that war was imminent to his colonial masters in order to get the money to fund the war. And he argued the best way to deal with their threat with Maori was to crush them in battle. They would respect that. The two proclamations, I believe, are pivotal because they're almost like a justification for his actions in taking the land. He had to have something in history books that said, well, I issued a proclamation, I gave them a warning, I said, this is, if you don't do this, then you are going to be deemed to be a rebel, and we will attack you, and we will beat you, and we'll take your land. And that's exactly what I did.
You had to make a deal.
Correct. The second proclamation certainly, absolutely did that. I think that's less valid because they never even received it. There was no honour in the receipt of the second proclamation.
The ones that stayed on the land got arrested anyway.
Correct, absolutely. And those that stayed behind, yes, they got arrested anyway. So Grey was asserting his queen's sovereignty, thus absolutely making sovereignty a cause of the war. So I see sovereignty as like Ballot says. And in fact, Ballot uses the argument, he says that the governor's sovereignty was nominal up to the time of the Waikato War, and taking all that land made their sovereignty substantive. He uses those two words, nominal sovereignty before, substantive sovereignty afterwards, and I said to you that's what the action of taking land does. And that's why for Maori the consequences of the war, the taking of land, were probably far more